Okay. I want to thank everyone for joining us on the April meeting, actually, not the March meeting. As you know, March is Archaeology Month. It's over with, but we did have a good event. For the people who attended the Fish Island tour, Marcia Chance did an excellent tour. We had a good turnout. We are on Zoom, as we said. Unfortunately, we were thinking of going live, but things didn't work out for a number of reasons. A few more folks coming in. Next meeting, which will be on the 3rd of May, will also be on Zoom. The decision was made that rather than be up in the air and not knowing Zoom and not Zoom and last minute changes, we decided we will be Zooming it in May. It'll be the last meeting until we meet again in September. So in the May meeting, we're going to have Sarah Miller from FPAN and Chuck Mead from LAMP tell us what's going on in their neck of the woods and what has happened in the last 12 months. So it's the 3rd, 7 o'clock, business as usual, and we'll be on Zoom. Nick, can you tell us what's going on with the membership and the treasury?
Sure. Basically, I want to thank people. That last month is technically the month when people renew their memberships, and we definitely had that happen quite a lot in this last month. Really appreciate everyone who did that. And the two easiest ways to do it are just send us a check. All you need to do is have your basic information, your contact information, so we can double check and make sure we have the up-to-date info on your email and that sort of thing, and your telephone number. And you can do it that way. It's part of the old school way of doing it, sending in a check. And it's $15 for an individual, $20 for a household. And the other way to join is through Square. And Square is basically a way of using a credit card to make a purchase. It's used by a lot of small stores and things, and it's been quite successful. We have every year more and more people are using that to either renew or to make donations to us. Hint, hint. Anyway, that you can get to that Square account by either Googling the name of our organization and then Square, or you can get to it through the Facebook page or the website. Either way, so that's a pretty easy way to do it. You just go about it like easy to follow. Couple of menu items. Anyway, the membership dues are coming along. If you haven't renewed yet this year or in the last, say, 6 months or so, you can do that. That'd be great, and help keep us going. And if you have any questions, you can always email me. My email's around. It's nmcauliff@yahoo.com, and it's on our website and such like. And I can check the status and see if you're up to date or not. The other thing I just want to mention very quickly is our education fund, Eugene Lyon Education Fund, which started this time last year, basically. And this is the time of year when we try to raise some money for it. Last year we were very successful. Besides the $500 that SAAA committed to it as a group, we got a little over $1,000 in donations, almost all from members. That's very gratifying, and we were able to help to fund three different projects that all have some connection to St. Augustine on three different levels: an undergrad, a grad student, and a fairly recent grad doctoral person who's teaching. And we're able to provide that funding because of this. And during the fall, we'll be hearing about those either either by a actual talk from one or more of those people, or a report of one kind or another. So we'll be kept up to date with what the funding helped happen. And as I said, they all have to do with St. Augustine or Greater St. Augustine, so that's a good thing. So, we should consider to, in any of the ways I mentioned, as renewing, you can also enclose the lecture for this fund. And the more we get, the more we can give out. So it's a good thing. We hope that it'll become an annual event, an annual ability to make things a little bit easier for students as they do their research. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, Nick, thanks. Yeah, we're looking forward to hearing from those folks in the fall. Robbie, anything going on with FBAN?
Yeah, I got a few things in April. I'm on the final tail end of the Pinehurst Cemetery recording project that I've been working with some volunteers out there. And Pinehurst is in West Augustine, in one of the oldest African-American cemeteries. And we probably have a few more weeks out there, Thursday starting at 10. And also on this coming Thursday, April 7th at 5:30 p.m., actually doing something live at the Proctor Library. Sarah Miller is going to be a guest speaker on ceramics at the opening reception for the students' ceramic sculpture show. So that's going to be happening 5:30 on Flagler campus this Thursday. And let's see, then we also have a Nahar, our North American Heritage at Risk lecture, which is going to be on Friday, the next day, April 8th at 9 a.m. And that is Zoom, where they focus on one kind of at-risk archaeological site on the East Coast. It's a partnership we have with a lot of other groups. And then April 21st at 7 p.m., we're going to be doing a lecture on the archaeology of nails. So you don't want to miss that one. That is going to be also via Zoom. So they're all free to the public. You just need to register in order to get the Zoom link. So I'm going to drop in the chat box the FPAN events page, so you all can read more about the events or sign up if you're interested.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Let me go to our famous, the artifact of the month. Let me share my screen here. We'll put that up. Aha. No guesses now. We're going to do that at the end of the meeting, but that is the artifact of the month. Suzanne Dixon isn't on. She usually gets these right, so someone else can get a shot at it this go around. We'll bring that back after the lecture. Okay. We're fortunate to have a very good guest speaker, but we're not going to have him live. Most of us know Charles Tingley. He's the senior librarian at the St. Augustine Historical Society. He's the recipient of numerous historical awards, to include the D. Avalos Award from the city of St. Augustine. He is also the president of the Friends of the Huguenot Cemetery. And most of us will remember that Charles is also a past president of SAAA. With the pandemic, going back, I guess, about a year and a half ago, the Historical Society ceased having their meetings, and they were doing them either on Zoom or recording. And I happened to see a meeting or a lecture that Charles did probably about a year and a half ago, and it was excellent. And just talking to a lot of people, a lot of people had not seen it. So we approached Charles and we approached the Historical Society and asked them if we could use that lecture, and both of them have gratefully agreed to letting us do that. So let me bring this on. The name of the lecture is Named Places in St. Johns County, and unfortunately, Charles is not with us today. He's not on the Zoom call, but he said if anyone has any questions, he'd be glad to answer them if you send him an email. And let me just give you his email address, and I'll give it again at the end of the lecture. But it's CA, and his last name is Tingley, Tingley, and that's at gmail.com. So it's CA Tingley at gmail.com. So if you do have any questions, write them down and you can zip it to him. He'll be glad to answer those. Let me just kill my video and see if we can get Charles to begin here.
It's the place names of St. Johns County. Now, you might have some questions in the back of your mind when we talk about place names, like how does a space become a named place? What do we call a place? Who names it? Who has the power to name? Does the Postal Service get involved? And how are streets named? Those are some of the questions I plan on answering today. Now, here we have the earliest known map of what we call Florida today. It's the Cantino map of 1502. Yes, I said 1502. This is before our first official visitor, Juan Ponce de Leon, arrived in 1513. And you will note that there is a peninsula north of Cuba. Now, this was just an unnamed spot on the map. Oops. When Ponce de Leon arrives in 1513, he has the honor of baptizing this place. And baptizing is a good word because, generally speaking, with Roman Catholic explorers, they chose the Roman Catholic calendar of feasts of saints and other special occasions to name places. So because Juan Ponce de Leon arrived during the Easter season, which in Spanish they call the Pascua de la Florida, the Feast of Flowers, that name was chosen for his new landing place, which was very close to St. Augustine, according to Herrera's History of the Indies. Now, the French arrive 50 years later or so, in 1562. And I think we often ignore the impact of the French upon the history of St. Augustine and St. Johns County. But Jean Ribault arrived when he first came to Florida in 1562. And when he first landed and interacted with the Native Americans, it was here in St. Augustine, not up at the mouth of the St. Johns River or further north at Port Royal in South Carolina. And we're very lucky that Jacques Lemoyne de la Morgue drew drawings of that trip, which were later engraved and published by Theodore de Brie. And so you can see here that the map's in Latin. And so this is abbreviated Promontorium Gallicum, French point. And then we have F. Delphinum, which is Fluvinus Delphinum, which is River of Dolphins. Now, of course, Ribault didn't stick around that time. He landed and tried to establish a colony at Port Royal in today's South Carolina. But in 1564, René de Lardinière returned, and he also landed at the same place that Jean Ribault had 2 years earlier. And he names the estuary there, the Rivière des Dauphins, River of Dolphins, which may be a pun on the name given to the heir apparent to the French throne, which is the Dauphin, much like in England you have the Prince of Wales. Now, this is Theodore de Brie's map, published in 1591, showing some of these locales and some of the most ancient names that we have. So down here at the bottom, we have, again, it's in Latin, so it's prom for promontorium, Canaveral, Cape Canaveral, and then here's Promontorium Gallicum, and then we have Fluven May, the River of May, which is the St. John's River, and a number of other names that have survived to some extent. This is an English map of 1640 that was still being influenced by the French names. So again, rather than the St. John's River or the Rio de Salamatoto, we have the River of May, the shoreline of the French shoreline, Borne des François, the River of Dolphins, and here's Cap François. So these French names lingered on in maps long after the Spanish had established the colony here in St. Augustine and wiped out the French. Now, this is one of our earliest really good maps of St. Augustine. Gonzalo de Mestas lived in St. Augustine for many, many years, and he very much knew what he was looking at, but his cartography was not the best. But if you look very closely at this fabulous map, there are new names now being ascribed by the Spanish to places in St. Johns County, like San Agustin and Caño de San Sebastian River, and Nombre de Dios for the mission, and Siloy for the Indian village. And here is a close-up of the map in black and white, and we see Pueblo de los Indios, Nombre de Dios. And so this is a nice image showing the structures at the Franciscan mission of Nombre de Dios that was established in the late 1570s. Now, when we talk about who has the power to name places, the history of the southeast of North America is very much wrapped up into the power struggle, first between the French and the Spanish, but that didn't last very long, and then between the English and the Spanish. And when King Charles I of England first charted a colony for Carolina, he established their boundary based on rather dubious claims of John and Sebastian Cabot that they had traveled very far south along the coast. So you will see that in this English map from 1711, that the south bounds of Carolina are further south than St. Augustine, about in the vicinity of today's Palm Coast. So, and this is part of the reasons why the English justified their continually fighting against the Spanish inhabitants here in St. Augustine, or as they would call it, San Agustin. And here's a map showing some of the Indian villages around St. Augustine. So we have Nombre de Dios, or also referred to as Macaris, which name survives in Macaris Avenue and Macaris Street. We have Tolomato, whose name survives in the cemetery on the site. The other names, Palica, La Punta, Pocatalaca, Chiquito, and San Nicolas de Casapulla have not survived. Now, Casapulla survived into the 19th century with a ranch down in the area of Moultrie Creek named Casapulla. So some of these names have very long lives. Now, this is a map by John Gordon, the business partner of Jesse Fish, who was one of the two Englishmen who stayed behind from the first Spanish period in 1763 when the British took over Florida to act as real estate agents for the departing Spaniards. And I know it's impossible for you to read at home, but it is full of place names. And it's absolutely a fascinating map because sometimes that is the only reference we have to what the Spanish called some of the geographic features, creeks and islands in the vicinity of St. Augustine. So today, what we call Jackride Island was Biloa, and we have San Nicolas, and so 6 Mile Creek or Trout Creek, one or the other was San Nicolas. We have the lands of the village of Salamatoto, which was a large Indian village, and frequently the Spanish would refer to the St. Johns River as the Rio de Salamatoto. So there's lots of interesting features. These are some of the names that survive from the first Spanish period, that time period before 1763. So we have San Diego, which was the name of the area in the Ponte Vedra area. So there we have San Diego Road. Seloy goes by various spellings, and we have a relatively recent subdivision off of State Road 16 called the Villages of Seloy. The Rio de Guana, and so we have Guana River and Guana Park today. Iroquois, which is a subdivision on the same piece of land up just south of the airport. Casacola, which is a creek name just north of the airport. That is a first Spanish period name. And then Picolata out on the St. Johns River west of St. Augustine, as well as Tocoy, which goes by different spellings. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, we have the San Sebastian River and Macaras Creek. And of course, the Spanish called Anastasia Island the Isla de Santa Anastasia. Now, of these first Spanish period place names, this is how the percentages break down as to what the Spanish use as part of their naming practices. As I mentioned a minute ago, they often used the saint's name associated with when they first came across a piece of territory. And you'll get everything from, say, Corpus Christi, Texas, to the Bay of Santa Maria, which is now the Chesapeake Bay. So 8% of the names in the first Spanish period were personal names associated with an individual or an Indian leader associated with that piece of territory. Then 8% were commemorative names of some event. Most famously here, Matanzas River, Matanzas Inlet, which means slaughter, and it's because of the defeat of the French at Matanzas Inlet. But 37% of the names are religious names, and 45 are descriptive. So it will talk about what you find on it. There's a creek of parrots, for instance. Guana River is derived from guana being palm thatch. So there are descriptive names, which are 45% of all the names that we know about from the first Spanish period. Now, when the British took over in 1763, probably about 30 people from the first Spanish period stayed behind. That's like 5 families and their slaves. So the British had a field day renaming places. And many, many, many of the place names that survive today are derived from the British period, and particularly a great map that William Gerald de Brahms produced in 1769. So we have places on the map that says Cunningham Bay. We now have Cunningham Creek up in the Fruit Cove area, or Switzerland area. We have Pupo Point in the same vicinity, 6 Mile Creek, St. Mark's Pond up near Palencia, in the 12 Mile Swamp area. Matanzas Inlet has survived. Of course, St. Augustine, as opposed to San Agustin. Let me take a moment right now to explain one of the most frequently asked questions. Why do we call our city St. Augustine, when in English, the Bishop of Hippo, that it's named after, is St. Augustine? Well, it's because in Spanish, you pronounce the Bishop of Hippo's name Augustine, with an accent on the I. So what we have in the name of the city of St. Augustine is Spanglish. Rather than San, we have Saint. We spell it as if it was in English, but we pronounce it as if it's in Spanish. Okay? And then we have what de Brahms referred to as San Sebastian Creek, which we now call the San Sebastian River. He labels Fort Mosa, which we all know as Fort Mose today, using the Spanish term, and again, Guana River. Now, by the 1890s, we start getting the influence of the railroad and new towns being created in St. Johns County. But some of those new communities went by one name and then they switched to another. So the railroad, which ran out of St. Augustine over towards Hastings and East Palatka, and then turned and angled south to Bunnell and Point South. So that in 1890, there was a place called Smith's. Obviously, there was some guy named Smith that lived out there, but today we call it Vermont Heights because in the 19-teens, a developer from Vermont decided to lay out a subdivision there, and that name has become what we use today. The hamlet of Middleton, established by the Middleton family, is now Elkton. What we now call Spuds, for very obvious reasons, was called Old. Holy Branch, near St. Ambrose Church, we now call Moccasin Branch. Maryfield, it was the vicinity of Hastings in 1890. And there's a survivor there. If you go to County Line Produce, there's a little dirt road just next to County Line Produce. That's Maryfield Road. That's the last surviving remnant of that name. And then we have San Diego Creek on this map in 1890 that, because it was the river that went to San Diego, the Ponte Vedra area, and we now call it North River or Tolomano River. Then by 1916, we've got even more new names, and many of these have dropped off of our current names for places. Places like Pinehurst, which was near Cunningham Creek Elementary School in the north part of the county. There was actually a boarding school there called the Pinehurst Seminary. Evaville, which was a little town also in the northern part of the county. Woodland, Cooley, which we now call Cooley Cove, or Palmo. Riverdale has survived to this day, but Smith has changed its name again. It's now called Herds. It hasn't become Vermont Heights yet. And then a new name by 1916 is Hastings. New Augustine, which was its own municipality that was established along West King Street, west of the San Sebastian River. We see the appearance of Crescent Beach and Bunnell, which Bunnell was part of St. Johns County at this time, and it wasn't established until about 1904, if I remember correctly. Now, who gets to name these places? Well, it's very often the founders or the developers. So obviously Juan Ponce de Leon, who arrived here in 1513, chose the name for Florida, Pascua, from the feast day in the Catholic Church that he arrived on. Pedro Menendez did the same thing. He spotted land on the 28th of August, which was the feast day of St. Augustine of Hippo. Then modern day developers like August Heckscher, who in the 1920s laid out the Volano Beach subdivision. He chose the name Volano, which I love the derivation of it. You won't find this term in a Castilian English dictionary, but you will find it in an American usage Spanish English dictionary. Volano is a type of sand spur. And not only does you know that there's plenty of sand spurs at Volano Beach, but it is a spur of sand, so it's a wonderful pun. And James Middleton, he was a proud member of the Elks Club, so he changed Middleton, which was named after him, to Elkton. And in the 1930s, the Stockton Company, who developed Ponte Vedra, chose that name after Pontevedra, Spain. Note that Pontevedra in Spain is just one word. It's not two words. And it is actually a corruption of the ancient Latin term for that area in Spain, Pontis Vetera, which means old bridge. Now, the federal government gets involved with naming places. In fact, the U.S. Board of Topographic Names of the U.S. Geological Survey is the final arbiter in what geographic names in the United States are. You have to register names with them for place names, and if they don't like it, it's not going to show up on any map. And here are some of the basic rules that they have. You've got to use the Roman alphabet. So you can't write something in Russian using the Cyrillic alphabet or a Chinese character or Hebrew characters. You have to use the Roman alphabet. When deciding on a name, you should respect the current day local usage. What do people call this place? And this has ramifications here in that there used to be two little sandbars in what's today Anastasia State Park. There was Conch Island and Bird Island. Well, Bird Island has merged with Conch Island, and the name Conch has won out as to what we call that. I don't think anybody refers to Bird Island being the southern portion of that piece of turf. Also, other authorities, whether it's the U.S. Army or the U.S. Postal Service, has a hand in naming places. There's a famous story of where I grew up in the Clearwater area that the town of Green Spring wanted to get a post office, but the post office wouldn't let them because they felt it was too close of a name to Green Cove Springs. So that community is now Safety Harbor. Also, and this may seem obvious to you, that there must be only one name and spelling of each feature. But this contrasts dramatically with the bilingual approach that the Canadians have, that everything's got to have essentially two names, one in French and one in English. So there are different systems elsewhere than the United States. Now, I mentioned the issue with Conch Island a minute ago, and this is where the federal authorities, I think, screwed up, and they, to some extent, corrected their mistake. There was a French professor about 10 or 12 years ago who persuaded the U.S. Geological Survey that they needed to call something in this area after what Jean Ribaud and René de Laudonnière called a promontory here. He screwed it up. He originally proposed that this was Cape Francis, translating Francois as Francis, because he wasn't local, didn't know his local history, had not read Theodore de Brie's text, obviously, thoroughly enough, because In Theodore de Brie's text about those explorations, he specifically says they named it in honor of France. So these are two relatively recent maps. So at first we have the U.S. Geological Survey naming these north end of Conch Island, and here's Conch Island, labeled very correctly, as Cape Francois. Well, just a few years later, it gets changed to the more correct term, French Cape. But they're still not abiding by local usage. So they've broken one of their own commandments in that nobody here calls that area on the South Jetties French Cape. Now, these are some of the other names that the U.S. Postal Service has been involved with making official. You know, sometimes the first time a community gets together to choose what they're going to call a place is when they request a post office. So these are some of the earliest post offices in St. Johns County. So we have St. Augustine in 1821, Piccolata in 1841, Tocoi in 1859. Notice how many of these places, Florence, anybody knows where Florence is? Florence Cove is just south of the Shands Bridge, but it used to have a dock that received steamboats. Back in the, when in 1868, it's got a post office. And Mill Creek got a post office in 1868 as well. Now, Fruit Cove got one in 1877, Orangedale in 1880, Switzerland in 1881, Moultrie in 1882, Matanzas. And the Matanzas post office may not be where you think it is. It's not over near the fort. It was up Pelletier Creek where the Matanzas School was. And Holy Branch and Armstrong all got post offices in 1886. So you can see this development of the interior of the county with little post offices being established in many places. Because you have to remember, at that time, people went to the post office to pick up their mail. There was not general delivery. So you had to have post office scattered about, convenient for people to occasionally get on a horse and get to the post office, because it was not delivered. You would go to the post office, and the postmistress or postmaster would usually know the people in the vicinity, but you'd say, oh, do you have any mail for John Smith today? And they'd deliver it. You did the same thing in the city of St. Augustine. It's one of the reasons why we didn't have street addresses until around 1900. The community of Anastasia may not be where you think it is. It was actually, the post office was in Lighthouse Park. And that was a Busum store, which is on White Street and is still standing. So one of these old post offices is still standing. The old post office in Racy is still standing. New Augustine had its own post office. Hastings in 1891, and Summer Haven, believe it or not, had its own post office in 1893. Now, local governments, as opposed to the federal government we were just speaking about, the state has the right to decide what state highways and bridges are called. So I was involved in 2015 of a petition that went forth to name the brand new US 1 bridge across the San Sebastian River after Juan Ponce de Leon in honor of the 500th anniversary of his naming Florida. And that was an act of the legislature. Now, St. Johns County names county roads and parks. The St. Johns County School Board is the final arbiter of what schools are called. And the municipalities, of which there are only 2 now in St. Johns County, name city streets and parks. Now, these are the rules that St. Johns County has for new names. And as I run through these, you will look at this and say, oh, these streets don't abide by these rules. Well, these are the rules for new streets. They weren't going to go back and change old streets. So, first of all, no duplicates allowed. No homophones allowed. So you can't spell Linwood with an I and Linwood with a Y and get away with it. English language is preferred, and Lord knows we have probably hundreds of foreign language words in St. Johns County streets, particularly Spanish. And I would probably say that in some of the golfing communities in the north part of the county, we've got some Gaelic names. Now, this may seem obvious that you have to use the same name for the entire length of the street or road. The only time the name can change is when it crosses an arterial highway. So it can be north such and such or south such and such. And that's pretty much for outside the limits of the municipalities. The St. Augustine Beach and the city of St. Augustine have the rights to name their own streets whatever they want. Now, this may surprise you that a street or road serving 3 or more properties has to have a name. And also roadways within commercial developments have to have names. So you have Jenkins Drive inside the Cobblestone Shopping Center. So those people in the Cobblestone Shopping Center, you have a Jenkins Drive address. You don't address them as just Cobblestone Shopping Center. And here's an odd one. You can't use a number as a street name. So you can't call something First Lane, spelling out first. And there can be no special characters, no hyphens or apostrophes are allowed in St. Johns County street names. And I just mentioned that on long roads, say Whitney Street, you have North Whitney Street north of the arterial highway, which is King Street, and South Whitney Street south of King Street. There's more. It can only be 15 letters long because the county commission doesn't want to print up special long street signs. And here's one that's been broken many times in the past. You can't have a complete personal name like John Brown Avenue. Well, Joe Aston Road, which we all know out in the Piccolata area, that breaks that rule, but they're not going to go back and change it. This is for new names. The use of "and" is forbidden in a street name. So you can't have Tom and Mary Drive. You can't use an article in the street name. It can't be the Mellon Court. It just has to be Mellon Court. And you need to use standard names for types of streets. Streets, avenues, lane, drives, ways, the standard. Now, we break rules here because we use some of the Spanish. There's a whole subdivision down south of Walmart that uses the Spanish term calle for street. You can't use a name that already has a street named for it and just change the end term. So you can't have Magnolia Street and Magnolia Avenue now. Now, in the city of St. Augustine, there is a Magnolia Avenue and a Magnolia Street. One is at the Fountain of Youth and the other one's in Lighthouse Park. You can't name a street after a type of street. So no Court Street or Highway Road. No slurs, slang, or puns are allowed, which I think is kind of a shame. It makes our street names much more drab. And all these names, before the developer can start using them in his new development or her new development, has to be approved by the county's GIS addressing system. A lot of these rules came out of when the 911 emergency system was implemented in the early 1990s, because you know, let's face it, if you're calling up and having, oh, I'm having a heart attack on Magnolia, well, do you mean Magnolia Avenue or Magnolia Street? That's really tough for the ambulance driver. So they want distinctive names. Now, so far as city street names are concerned, I use the 1930 Sanborn Fire Insurance map as a good map to figure out how we name streets in the city of St. Augustine, what types of names that we use. And as opposed to the Spanish, which had only 8% of the place names being personal names, here in the city of St. Augustine, 53% of the streets are personal names. Grant Street, Washington Street, Ponce de Leon Boulevard. Then there are 23% that are geographic features, Spring Street. Then there's 14% that are inanimate objects. And only 9% are plants and animals. We don't have very many streets named after trees like magnolia or orange. We do have some, but when you look at the broad picture of all the street names in St. Augustine, 53% are personal names. And I think that's really telling in that in many communities, well, let's say Miami, everything is numbered except for a couple of boulevards like Biscayne Boulevard and Flagler Street. There are some towns where the town of Palm Harbor over in Pinellas County, the streets are all named after states. So we're very different in that we have so many personal names associated with our streets. Two of my favorites are up near the Deaf and Blind School because we have Gabriel Street, and the next street right after that is Perpall Street. So guess what? They're named after Gabriel Perpall, who was mayor of St. Augustine in the 1820s. Now, we have a number of misspelled streets, and this drives some people crazy. But I think we're stuck with it. So Dr. Whedon, the guy who famously cut off Osceola's head, but the street named after him here in St. Augustine, near where he owned property, is Whedon Street with an E, not an O. And the developer of the Abbott Tract area was Peter Shenandoah Smith. Well, somebody said, Shenandoah? That can't be right. It's got to be Shenandoah. But no, Shenandoah was a Native American chief in New York State, and that's who he's named after. Not Shenandoah, or Shenandoah, it's Shenandoah. But I don't think we're ever going to change that. And the one that drives Hispanics crazy is the saintly Father Felix Varela gets his street name misspelled. And in Spanish, if you know anything about Spanish, if you use a double L rather than a single L, it is pronounced completely differently. It would be Varela with the double L rather than Varela. And then we've got this crazy case that up until the 1940s, Riberia Street was Ribera Street. And Ribera Street makes perfect sense. It means shoreline, because everything west of Riberia Street is filled. We've gone through the city commission minutes. Nobody passed an ordinance changing the name. It's just really weird that somebody dropped in an extra I into that name. Now, there are place names out in the county that are corrupted. Sampson, which a lot of people don't refer to Sampson very much anymore, but there's still the Sampson Cemetery. This is near the intersection of 210 and 95. But the British period landowner in that area that it's actually named after was Samson, James Samson, without the P. We have a similar case at Racy Point. Today, you look at all the maps and it's R-A-C-Y. Well, William Racy, who owned that land in 1852 that the place is named for, is R-A-C-E-Y. Julington Creek is named after Francis Leavitt's Julianton plantation, named after his wife, Julia. So that got smushed around a little bit. And I'm speculating here, but Durbin Creek, Durbin is a really unusual name. I mean, the only other place in the world that has a Durban is South Africa, where the city of Durban is called that. I think it's actually a corruption of Dr. Turnbull's wife's name. Maria Durbabin was her maiden name. That is speculation, but the Turnbulls did own property in the vicinity of Durbin Creek. But it is one of our more unique place names, and the first time it appears on a map is in 1817, where the road crossing Durbin Creek, the King's Road crossing Durbin Creek, is referred to as Durbin Bridge. So that would be up along Old St. Augustine Road between US 1 and going over towards State Road 13. Now, sometimes there's a wonderful story behind a place name, and my favorite is Molasses Junction. John Rohero grew sugarcane near that location out in the county on the way to Tokoi. And the right-of-way for County Road 214 used to be the roadbed for the St. John's Railroad, which went from Tokoi into St. Augustine right after the Civil War. And it was one of the short line railroads that were eventually purchased by Mr. Flagler, but then he eventually abandoned that line when he created the railroad that went through Hastings over to East Palatka. He thought that was a better way to get to the river. And so he sold it to the county to use as a roadway. So Mr. Rohero was shipping barrels of molasses and using the train. Well, a barrel slipped and caused the other barrels to fall. And so they broke on the ground and made a large sticky mess. Dare I say the place name stuck? Now, some of the new communities have interesting place name derivations. Plancia, the Heinz Company of Houston, Texas, who was developing this large community, originally in all their early planning documents called it Marshall Creek. Marshall Creek is a small creek off of the North River or Tolomono River that is named for Teresa Marshall, who was the landowner in that vicinity in the early 19th century. But somehow or another, they changed their mind and decided they wanted a more Hispanic name. They chose Palencia. Now, Palencia is a city in central Spain, and it's very close to the birthplace of Juan Ponce de Leon. So they specifically chose Palencia because of its association with the Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon and his association with St. Johns County. Nocatee. Well, you know there's another Nocatee in Florida? It's down in back of Bradenton. It's out in the middle of nowhere. I've been there. I know. It's got a gas station, and that's it. But the Nocatee Manatee Crate Company of DeSoto County, Florida, DeSoto County is where Arcadia is, purchased property in the area that's now been developed as Nocatee. And so when the park group decided to develop that land, they cast about for a name that they thought would be interesting. And since there was no post office in the other Nocatee, Florida, Nocatee was up for grabs and they took it. This does not please the people in the other Nocatee. So the crate company bought that land because they needed pine for their wooden crates. Greg Barber, a spokesman for the park company, he said the name means peaceful river. I'm not so sure about that, but that's what they think it means, and I'll give it to them in some Native American language. Now, one of the more interesting stories recently has occurred in 2005 and 2006, and that was the movement of the people in the northwest portion of St. Johns County whose motto was anything but Jacksonville. For years, they'd been serviced out of the Mandarin post office, and so even though they were in St. Johns County, their postal address would be Jacksonville. So the Northwest Area Business Council decided to hold a meeting which drew 150 people to discuss what they could call the northwest portion of the county. And there were 75 different names proposed. 75. Now, of course, historically, the most prominent is Fruit Cove for the section north of Cunningham Creek, and Switzerland for the areas south of Cunningham Creek. And as I told you, Julington, which the large creek on the north side of it, the plantation that is named for is not where Julington Plantation subdivision is. It's on the north side of the creek in Mandarin. So, of the names suggested, the highest vote getters was Fruit Cove, 33%, River Cove, 26%, St. John's, 25%, St. John's Cove, 8%, Bartram, 3%, Switzerland, 1%, and coming in last was River Oaks. Well, something happened with this count. I don't know whether somebody manipulated the ballot box or whether this was an online survey, but the newspaper account says that the vote count was contaminated. So they threw it out. So they held an online vote for only the households in the 32259 zip code, which includes all that area. And it was only one vote per household. And they eliminated many of the likely candidates from historic names. And this may be because the people in Fruit Cove didn't want to be called Switzerland, the people in Switzerland didn't want to be called Fruit Cove, so what they did was they just, okay, we're not going to call it either of those names. So your only choices were River Oaks, which had come in last in that initial vote, River Cove, St. John's Cove, Bartram, and St. John's. And this later vote was handled by the St. Augustine, St. John's County Chamber of Commerce, not the Northwest Area Business Council, which was the original proponent of a new name. So on April 21st, 2005, it was announced that St. John's was decided as the winner with 35.62% of the votes. Now, here's the weird thing. If you live up there, you can still put Jacksonville on your mailing address, on your return address. You can still put Fruit Cove. You can still put Switzerland. You can even put Sampson. But as time goes by, I think more and more people are recognizing that area as St. John's, which is a little confusing because there's a hamlet in Flagler County, which is St. John's Park. I want to thank you all for your attention, and I hope this program has opened your eyes to some of the most interesting and some of the oldest place names in not only St. Johns County and not only Florida, but North America. We have pre-Columbian names like the Saloy and Macaris, and we have early Spanish names like San Agustin and Matanzas, but it shows the evolution of the county through its place names, and each sovereign country leaving its impact on the place names from French Cape to Nocatee. So thank you very much for your attention. This series of programs by the St. Augustine Historical Society will continue throughout the fall and winter. So keep checking back on your
Okay, I want to thank Charles and the Historical Society for letting us use that video. I know there was a number of people who seemed to come in a little bit late. This entire presentation will probably be on YouTube in a day or two, so you'll be able to watch if you miss some of the beginning. Let me just bring up Charles' image here. For the folks who don't know him, this is Charles Kingsley, and again, he is open to any questions you might have on the presentation. His email is CA, and it's Tingsley, Tingley, and that's at gmail.com. Let me go to our famous Name That Architect. Name That Artifact, I should say. Okay, if you're muted, you can unmute yourself. Anybody have any idea what this is and where it came from? No takers. What does it look like? Anybody? Okay, there'll be no prizes this month. Let me tell you what it is.
Like an egg.
Say again?
Like an egg.
Who said that?
Susan.
Like an egg. It
It
is
looks
an
like an
egg. You're absolutely right. This was in the backyard of a building that was put up probably at the turn of the century in Lincolnville. The building was pretty old. We couldn't date the actual date when it went up, but it had a hand water pump in the back, so it obviously went up before there was any water in that area. And there was a pile of these when we were doing a survey. They're putting an extension on the building, so the archaeology department had to go out and survey it. There was a pile of chicken eggs, and that is in actually a tin can. So someone was making eggs, cracked them open, put the shells in the can, and this was one. There's a ton of eggs. They must have had a lot of eggs in that family, and it was probably buried, I'd say about maybe 2 feet. They must have just dug a hole and threw their garbage in there. But that's a 100-year-old cracked chicken egg. Okay. So with that, I think we'll end the meeting. Again, just to remind you, the next meeting will be our May meeting. It'll be on May 3rd. It'll be on Zoom. And we'll have Sarah Miller from FPAN and Chuck Mead from LAMP filling us in as to what they've done in the last year. So with that, we will end the meeting. I thank you. And again, if you missed any portion of it, go to YouTube. It should be on in a day or two. Thank you for attending and have a good evening.